A concrete tower rises 90 feet above a granite ridge in Northern California. Octagonal, streamlined. A copper crown at the summit oxidized to blue-green after 60 years of mountain wind. From 20 miles away, it catches the afternoon sun like a small, slow fire. Closer now. A steel staircase spirals up the outside. 187 steps, no handrail on the inside, just concrete, and the drop. Closer still, a young woman stands at the base, 22 years old, two canvas bags, $411 in her pocket, and a brass key stamped with a triangle nested inside an octagon. She does not know what it opens. Down in the valley, three black SUVs are already leaving Sacramento. A lawyer named Sterling Pryke sits in the middle vehicle. He carries an envelope. He believes he has 72 hours. He does not know about the tower. He does not know about the archive underneath it. He does not know she is coming. The morning Junia Kettering turned 22, the fluorescent light above her bed in dorm room 4 flickered twice and gave up entirely. She lay in the sudden dark, listening. The vent hum, the distant tick of a radiator working past its expected life. The specific silence of a building that had housed her for 6 years and would house her one more hour. It did not feel like freedom. It felt like the moment before a door closes and locks itself from the other side. She got up, dressed in the dark, two canvas bags at the foot of the bed, the same bags she had carried in when the state moved her from the group home in Fresno at 16. Everything she owned fit inside with room to spare. A sketchbook almost full, 4 paperback novels with soft spines, a jacket she had outgrown but kept, 2 flannel shirts, socks paired by color, and at the bottom of the smaller bag, wrapped in a clean cotton handkerchief, a photograph she had carried since the day someone at the county records office slipped it into her file without a name attached. The photograph showed a woman in her 60s, standing on a porch Junia did not recognize. White hair pulled back loosely, strong hands, a smile that looked like it had survived something hard and come out the other side quiet and unafraid. On the back, in careful cursive, Almira. That was all. One word. Below it, a date from 24 years ago. Junia did not know much about Almira Trescott. What she knew she had gathered from paperwork in one telephone call to a county office in a place she had never been. Almira had been her mother's mother. Almira had lived in Northern California. Almira had died in February, quietly, in a rural hospital, without anyone at her side. And this morning, on the exact day Junia aged out of the system, whatever Almira had left behind was scheduled to arrive. She picked up her bags. She walked out of dorm room 4 for the last time. The administrative wing smelled the way it always smelled. Old carpet, instant coffee, the particular staleness of rooms where hard news is delivered by people who have delivered it too often to flinch. Ms. Verdine Ashmore was already at her desk, 58, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the practiced expression of a woman who had learned the exact distance to keep between herself and the person on the other side of the paperwork. She gestured to the chair. Junia sat. A folder on the desk. Beside it, a manila envelope soft at the edges with Junia's name written across the front in the same careful cursive she recognized from the back of the photograph. Ms. Ashmore opened the folder first. The words came in the order Junia expected. Transitional Housing Fund, Job Placement Resources, County Shelter List. She had read the pamphlets, she knew the statistics. She was not afraid of them exactly. She held them in her chest like stones she had been carrying long enough that she no longer noticed the weight. Then Ms. Ashmore set down her pen. There is one other thing, she explained slowly, the way she explained everything. Almira Trescott had died without a formal will, but 14 years ago she had filed a notarized deed of transfer with the county of Havelock, to be held in trust until Junia reached the age of majority. The deed had been sitting in a law office in Reading, waiting for this exact morning. She slid the envelope across the desk. Junia opened it. Inside, a deed thick with legal language. a smaller envelope beneath it. In the smaller envelope, a ring of keys on a worn leather fob. 2 keys total, one modern and silver, one old and heavy, made of brass that had gone dark with age. And beneath the keys, a stack of bills in mixed denominations held together with a rubber band. She counted them later, $411. The deed was for 72 acres of undeveloped land in a place called Ashen Ridge in Havelock County, California. The county assessor valued it at approximately $8,000. There were no structures listed, no utilities, no maintained road access beyond a fire road that was technically unmaintained county property. Ms. Ashmore let her read. Then she said, "There is a standing offer." A company called Black Pine Terra Holdings had been trying to acquire land in the Ashen Ridge area for 4 years. They had submitted a formal offer of $18,000 for the parcel. The offer was current. It had been renewed 4 times. Most recently, 5 weeks ago. $18,000, Ms. Ashmore said carefully, is a real sum of money for someone in your position. Junia looked at the deed, then at the keys. She turned the brass one over in her hand. It was heavier than it should have been. The teeth were unusual, longer than a standard house key, and on the bow stamped into the metal a small mark she did not recognize. A triangle nested inside an octagon. "What is this key for?" she asked. Miss Ashmore shook her head. The law office did not know. The key had been included when the deed was filed. Whatever it opened was on the property. Junia looked at the photograph, then at the name written in careful cursive, then at Ms. Ashmore. "I want to see it." Ms. Ashmore's expression shifted. Not quite surprise, not quite disappointment. The expression of a woman who had hoped for a different answer and had prepared herself for this one. "Junia, it is a 400-mile bus ride. The land has no value beyond the offer. You have $400 and no place to live." "I want to see it." She kept her voice level. She had learned early that the fastest way to lose an argument in a room like this was to let any emotion into it, because emotion gave people something to manage. Quiet gave them nothing to work with. Ms. Ashmore held her gaze for a long moment. Then she reached for her pen and began signing the release forms. The bus north left Bakersfield at 6 in the morning. Junia was the fourth person on it. She put her bags in the overhead rack, took a window seat, watched the city give way to outskirts, then to the long, flat agricultural land of the Central Valley, the orchards, the irrigation channels, the long, straight roads running to horizons that never quite arrived. She did not sleep. She was not tired in the way that leads to sleep. She was tired in a different way. Structural. The kind of tiredness that comes from years of low-grade alertness. Because relaxing is a thing you do in places where you are allowed to stay, and she had never been allowed to stay anywhere. She read the deed twice more. She looked at the assessor's map, an irregular shape on the eastern slope of a ridge north of a small town. A fire road, and near the northern boundary, a small square marked in pencil. No label, just the square. And beside it in faint pencil, a notation she had to hold the paper at an angle to read. P.I. Project something. She turned it over in her mind, then set it aside. By noon, the valley gave way to foothills. By late afternoon, the mountains proper. The road narrowed. The sky opened. The air outside the bus looked different up here, as if it had more actual substance to it. She thought about Almira Trescott as she rode, standing on that porch with her strong hands and her smile that had survived something. Almira had known she existed, had known for 22 years, had left her something specific, something that required a key, something with a triangle nested inside an octagon. A woman who did that had a reason. The second day, the landscape turned serious. Pines came in dense and dark on either side of the highway. Granite cliffs showed their age in the gray faces of the rock, in the way the stone had fractured and slid and stayed where it landed over uncountable years. She ate from a bag of food she had packed, watched the country change. She thought about the brass key, about the fact that Elmira had renewed the offer paperwork at the law office, had watched, had known when the moment would come, and had prepared for it long enough that a lawyer 400 miles away had a folder with Junia's name on it waiting. On the morning of the third day, the bus came into Ashenridge. It was barely a town. The road descended into a narrow valley. The valley widened slightly. There were buildings on both sides, not many. A gas station with pumps that looked 40 years old and were still working. A hardware store with a hand-lettered sign. A post office the size of a large closet. And a general store with a covered porch where two older men sat in wooden chairs in the morning cold. The bus stopped in front of the general store. Junia was the only one who got off. The cold hit her immediately. It was October and it was cold. The air was thin, bright, carrying the smell of pine resin and something mineral underneath. Rock. Frost coming down out of the high country. Old earth that had been undisturbed long enough to develop its own particular character. She stood on the gravel with her two bags, listened to the bus pull away behind her. And then there was just the wind in the pines, the creak of the wooden porch, the sound of the two men in their chairs shifting slightly to look at her. She went inside. The store was dim and crowded with inventory. Shelves, floor to ceiling, canned goods and hardware and work clothes and dried food and fishing tackle and seed packets, all arranged in a system that had the logic of long habit. Everything in the place it had always been, because that was where it belonged. A wood stove in the back corner was putting out steady heat. The smell was coffee and pine resin and machine oil. Behind the counter, a man in his late 60s, thick through the shoulders, white beard trimmed close, reading glasses on a lanyard around his neck. He looked up when she came in and did not immediately say anything, which she appreciated. He waited. She set her bags down, approached the counter. "My name is Junia Kettering. I am looking for a piece of land north of town, the Trescott parcel." The man behind the counter was quiet for a moment. He set down the pencil he had been holding. Trescott. He said it the way you say the name of someone you have not thought about in a while, but have not forgotten, taking it down from wherever it had been kept. Elmira Trescott was my grandmother. She passed in February. She left me the land. He looked at her steadily, pale blue eyes behind the reading glasses, eyes that had seen enough to be neither easily impressed nor easily alarmed, eyes that were taking their time with her. "Name's Osmond Bellwether. My family has run this store going on 51 years. I knew Elmira, not close, not the way you know a neighbor in town, but I knew her." He came around the counter, looked at the deed when she held it out, not touching it, just reading with careful attention. She came in every 3 weeks, kept to herself, paid cash, never caused trouble, never asked for anything she did not need. He paused. She had ways of knowing things. Elmira did, about this valley, about what was happening here and who was behind it. He looked up. She chose to stay quiet about most of it. Did not mean she forgot. "What things?" Junia asked. He looked at her a moment longer. Then he went back behind the counter. "You will find out, I expect. If you are going up there, there are things on that land that will tell you more than I can." He gave her a hand-drawn map of the fire road, told her it was a 5-mile walk from where the pavement ended, that the last mile was steep, that there was a structure on the northern end of the parcel, told her it had been standing there for as long as anyone in Ashenridge could remember, which was a long time. Then he told her something else. Black Pine Terra Holdings. He packed the words into his mouth like something with a bad taste that he had learned to manage. "They have been working this valley 6 years now, buying parcels. Sometimes folks sell because they want to. Sometimes they sell because they are tired of the letters, the phone calls, the clean city trucks parked at the end of their road." He looked at her directly. "They want the whole North Ridge. Yours is one of the last pieces they do not have. They have bought 7 around it in the last 4 years. Why? Resort development is what they say. Golf course, spa, bring in city money. He said it flatly. The way you say something you do not believe and have not believed from the beginning. You do not think that is what it is. He reached under the counter, came up with a hand-drawn list of names and parcel numbers, looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone reviewing evidence. Put it back. I think there are things buried under this valley that certain people would pay a very great deal to keep buried. And I think Elmira Trescott knew what some of those things were and spent 19 years deciding what to do about it. He gave her a bottle of water and a paper bag with a sandwich in it, refused to let her pay. She thanked him, picked up her bags, went back out into the bright, cold morning. The walk took 2.5 hours. The pavement ended at a rusted gate she had to climb over. After that, it was the fire road. 2 deep ruts worn into the mountain slope, pine needles thick between them. The kind of road that exists because people have needed to use it repeatedly over many years, and not for any more official reason than that. The trees closed over almost immediately. The light came through in columns, moving slow as the wind moved the upper branches, and the sound of the highway was gone, replaced by the sound of the forest, which was large and self-contained and entirely indifferent to her presence. She climbed. The grade was steady, the going was slow with the 2 bags. After the first hour, she shifted the smaller bag to her front and the larger to her back. Better, her legs found their rhythm. She had always been strong without trying to be, because there was never quite enough of anything in her life, and she had learned early to carry what she had and keep moving without expecting anyone to notice. She thought about Elmira as she walked, tried to construct a version of her grandmother from the available materials. A woman who had lived alone on a mountain for years, a woman who paid cash and kept to herself and had ways of knowing things about the valley. A woman who had written Junia's name in careful cursive on an envelope and arranged for a brass key with unusual teeth to be delivered on the exact right morning. What kind of woman does something like that? The kind who has a reason. The kind who is waiting for something specific. The kind who has planned for the wait to be long. She found the property marker on a rusted iron stake half buried in the pine duff. She left the fire road, followed the boundary line east through scrub and rock. The trees thinned, and she stopped walking, because she did not have language for what she was looking at. Rising above the pines on a flat granite shelf at the crest of the eastern slope stood a tower. Not a house, not a cabin, not any of the things the deed had suggested might be there. A tower. Concrete. Octagonal. Rising in a single unbroken shaft to a height she could not immediately calculate, but was certainly more than 80 feet. Perhaps 90. The concrete was gray, weathered to a soft charcoal at the edges, streamlined in the way old industrial buildings were streamlined once when the 20th century still believed in the future. Long, narrow windows set flush into each of the 8 walls. No ornament, no trim, just the pure geometry of the shape. Wrapped around the outside, a steel staircase, spiraling, open to the sky, from the ground to the top. She counted the switchbacks with her eyes, 6 full turns. And on top of the concrete shaft, a round observation cabin. Its walls were glass, curved industrial glass thick enough that she could see the thickness of it from the ground. Above the glass, a roof of copper, which had oxidized over 60 years into a hard blue-green patina. And the roof was shaped like a crown, a slow spiral crown that rose to a small closed point at the very center. Beside the tower, a communications mast of galvanized steel, 15 meters taller than the tower itself. A sharp black line cut into the pale sky. The sun was low. The afternoon light caught the copper roof, and the roof glowed. Not bright, slow, deep, the color of old gold seen through green water. Junia stood at the edge of the clearing. The wind moved through the pines with a low sound that was almost like breathing. Regular. Rise and fall. She did not think the word beautiful. She thought the word waiting. The tower had been waiting. She walked toward it. Up close, the base of the tower was even larger than it had looked from the tree line. She circled it once, slowly, Running her hand along the concrete, it was cold, dense, the kind of concrete you poured when you intended a thing to stand for generations. She found the door on the north face. Steel, riveted, painted the same soft charcoal as the concrete around it. A round handle, a single keyhole below the handle. Simple, industrial. She took the brass key from her jacket pocket, held it up to the lock, tried it. It did not fit. She turned it around, tried it upside down, tried it the other way. It did not fit because it was not the right key. She stepped back, looked at the tower again, at its unbroken concrete face. 8 walls, long narrow windows too high to reach, a single door with a single lock that her key would not open. And she understood, slowly. In the way understanding comes when your body has arrived somewhere before your mind is caught up. The key was not for the door at the bottom. She looked up, at the copper crown catching the afternoon light, at the steel staircase spiraling around the concrete shaft. And she began to climb, 187 steps. She counted them. The stairs were narrow. The railing on the outside was thin and cold. She kept one hand on it and the other hand on the concrete of the shaft, because there was no railing on the inside side, just concrete, and the drop. By the 5th switchback, her legs were burning. She did not stop. She had learned early that if you stopped in the middle of a hard thing, the hard thing got harder. So you kept going. At the 6th switchback, she stopped anyway, because the view had opened. Below her, the whole valley, the town of Ashen Ridge in miniature, the gas station, the general store, the tin roofs, the county highway curving south, and beyond that ridge after ridge of mountains, going blue in the failing light, going darker at the horizon, going forever. She had never been high enough above the world to see how much of it there was. She kept climbing. The last switchback ended at a small platform. The final flight of steps ran up along the outside of the copper roof itself, up to a small hatch in the underside of the cabin floor. The hatch was steel, circular, set flush with the platform above her head, a single keyhole in the center. She held her breath. She slid the brass key into the keyhole. It caught. Not immediately. It caught in the way old locks catch when they have been sitting undisturbed for years and have to remember what they are for. She applied steady pressure, not forcing it, letting the mechanism come back to itself. After 3 long seconds, it turned, with a sound like something releasing a breath it had been holding for a decade. The hatch dropped inward on a counterweight. A ladder unfolded down toward her. She climbed up through the hatch. The observation cabin was a single round room, 15 feet in diameter, curved industrial windows on every side. A brass compass rose inlaid in the concrete floor. Bearings marked in careful serif letters. North, northeast, east, and so on around. The view was 360 degrees. Mountains, valleys, the town below like a scattered handful of squares. The county highway, the ridges going out toward Oregon in one direction and toward the ocean somewhere in another. She could not see the ocean. She could feel where it was. There was almost nothing in the room, a single wooden stool, a cast-iron fire spotter's alley dot on a rusted stand, its optics long since fogged. A wooden shelf running around the wall at waist height, empty. And in the exact center of the floor, in the middle of the compass, rose a second hatch, a round steel plate set flush with the concrete, recessed handle, a single keyhole. She knelt down. The keyhole was different from the one above, larger, older. The teeth of her brass key were not for this lock. She sat back on her heels. 2 hatches, 2 locks, 2 keys. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out the second key, the modern one. It was small, silver-colored. She had assumed it was for the property gate. She had been wrong about that, too. She tried it in the floor hatch. It fit. She turned it. The lock drew back with a soft mechanical click. She pulled the handle. The hatch lifted on a counterweight, rose vertical, revealed. Below her, in the exact center of the concrete tower going straight down into the dark, a circular shaft. Steel rungs bolted into smooth concrete walls. Cold air rising, dry, mineral. The particular smell of a sealed space that had been properly maintained. She turned on her phone flashlight and shone it down. The rungs descended 30 feet, 40, 50, 60. The bottom was too deep to see clearly. She sat at the edge of the open hatch for a moment. The wind moved around the copper crown above her. The observation cabin creaked slightly in the way old buildings creak when they have adjusted to the movement of air for so long that the sound is part of the structure. She thought about the $18,000. Then she thought about Elmira writing her name in careful cursive. Then she stopped thinking. She swung her legs over the edge, found the first rung with her boot, and began to climb down into the shaft. The descent took longer than she expected. The air grew colder, stiller. The smells of the surface world faded behind her, replaced by something clean and deep and completely quiet. The air of a place that had been sealed and preserved, and was now, for the first time in years, being opened. She counted the rungs. 68. At 68, her feet touched a solid concrete floor. She was in a small circular chamber, smooth concrete walls, unmarked. Directly in front of her, a heavy steel door with a wheel mechanism at the center. Spoked iron fitted to a central locking bar. The kind of door used on ship bulkheads, built to hold against significant pressure from either direction. She put both hands on the wheel and turned. It was stiff at first, stiff the way things get when they have not moved in years, but have been properly maintained against the day they would need to move again. Then it was not stiff. The bolts drew back in sequence, 4 of them, each one making a sound she could feel through her palms as much as hear with her ears. The door swung inward. The air that came through was cool and clean. No smell of decay, no mold, no damp that destroys things over time. The air of a sealed space built by someone who understood what she was building and had done it correctly. She stepped through, raised her light. She stood still. Because it was not a bunker, it was not a shelter. It was a room designed for a person to work in. 20 feet by 20, ceiling 10 feet high. Concrete walls painted a soft matte white that had held its color perfectly under sealed air. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls. Banker's boxes, filing cabinets, all labeled in Elmira's careful hand. In the center of the room, a long wooden work table. On the table, 3 things laid out in perfect order. A leather-bound log book, a roll of drafting paper tied with faded ribbon, and on top of both a thick manila envelope with Junia's name across the front in careful cursive. She sat down at the work table. She opened the logbook first. The handwriting was Elmira's. Dates, measurements, construction notes, geological survey complete, northern quadrant, clay content nominal, reinforced concrete pour. Section 3, curing rate adequate, ventilation shaft 2, secondary intake fitted and sealed. Construction notes, precise, methodical, written by someone who knew what she was building and intended to document every stage of it. She turned to the roll of drafting paper, undid the ribbon, unrolled it on the table. Multiple sheets layered together, architectural drawings, detailed, professional, hand-drafted on proper drafting paper. She spread them out one by one. They were not drawings of a cabin. They depicted something vast and complex. The tower itself, yes. On the top sheet, every dimension of concrete and copper and glass meticulous. But below the tower, under the granite shelf on which it stood, the drawings continued, deeper. A central shaft descending 60 feet into the mountain, and branching off the base of that shaft chambers. Multiple chambers. A main living space with a kitchen and a sitting area and sleeping quarters for 2 people of different sizes. A second archive vault beyond the one she was standing in. Storage rooms. Mechanical systems drawn in precise detail. Water purification. Power generation. Ventilation with filtered intake and exhaust. Battery banks. Communications equipment. At the top of the first page in block letters drawn with a straight edge, Project Iron Root. And at the bottom a small aerial diagram of the property. A circle marking the tower. A dotted line indicating the extent of the underground complex running 200 feet beneath the granite. Beside the aerial diagram in Almira's hand home, Junia stayed in her chair without moving. She was aware of the cold, the silence, the changed quality of the air around her, which had shifted from empty to dense, from absence to presence. She was aware of the weight of the drafting paper in her hands, the precision of the lines, the scale notations, the years of work and planning encoded in every carefully drawn detail. She thought about what Osmond Bellwether had said. There are things on that land that will tell you more than I can. She rolled the drawings carefully back up, tied the ribbon, tucked the leather logbook under her arm. She had not opened the manila envelope with her name on it yet. Something in her wanted to save it, wanted to see the rest first. She crossed the archive room to the far wall. There, a second door, wooden this time, regular-sized, standing slightly ajar, as if someone had meant to pull it shut and had not quite managed to, or wanted to make sure that whoever came next would not mistake it for a wall. She pushed it open with her fingertips. Behind it, a hallway, concrete floor, concrete walls, 6 feet wide, 10 feet long. And at the end of the hallway, another door. She walked down the hallway, opened the door, and she stood at the threshold of a home. Not a bunker, not a shelter, a home, a living room 30 feet across, its ceiling 12 feet high at the center, furnished with chairs and a sofa and a low table, all covered in white dust cloths that had gathered dust but had not degraded, had not collapsed, had waited. Bookshelves ran the full length of one wall, packed tight with books, their spines visible in her light. Hundreds of them. A lifetime of reading. A kitchen area occupied one corner, countertops clean beneath their layer of dust, appliances of the simple and reliable kind, built to function for decades without drama, a lamp on a side table near the sofa, its shade still perfectly straight. She walked the room slowly, her footsteps making almost no sound on the concrete floor covered in a wool rug. She touched the back of one chair. Her fingertip left a clean trace in the dust. There were 3 doors off the living room. She opened the first, a bedroom, a neatly made bed, blankets tucked smooth under decades of settled dust, a small wooden desk, a closet with its door slightly open showing neatly hung clothes preserved by the sealed air. On the desk, a framed photograph. She picked it up. 3 people, an older woman, younger than the woman in the photograph Junia had carried in her bag, but unmistakably Almira. The same strong hands, the same quiet smile. A man in his 30s, dark hair, an open, serious face. The face of someone who thinks carefully before speaking. A woman beside him, laughing, her head tilted back, one hand raised in the middle of some gesture, caught there permanently by the camera, and in the laughing woman's other arm, held against her hip, a baby, small enough to be new to the world. The laughing woman's smile, the particular shape of it, the way it reached all the way to her eyes and changed the whole geometry of her face. Junia had seen that smile before, in mirrors. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Her hands were still raw from the door mechanism above, and the metal of the bed frame was cold. But she did not notice either of those things. She held the photograph in the beam of her phone light. At the bottom right corner of the frame, a strip of paper had been taped with the care of someone making a permanent label. Written in Almira's hand, Lizette Thane and Arjunia, the reason for everything. She held it in her lap, not moving. Then she got up, set the photograph carefully back on the desk, left the bedroom, crossed the living room to the second door, opened it. The room was smaller. A narrow bed, child-sized, a chest of drawers, a shelf of children's books with their spines faded but their titles still legible. A small wooden box on the dresser with a simple latch. She opened it. Inside was a child's drawing, crayon on folded paper, a house and a tree, and two stick figures of different heights, the taller one holding the hand of the smaller one. Written at the top in large, careful letters, "Me and Grandma Elmira." She had no memory of drawing it, but the handwriting was hers. She recognized the way she had always formed her capital M, with a slight lean to the right that no teacher had ever managed to correct. Somewhere in a past that existed before her memory began, she had been here. Elmira had known her when she was small enough to draw stick figures with crayons and write 4 words across the top of a folded piece of paper. She closed the box, set it back exactly where it had been. Then she looked up. Above the small bed carved into the wood of the headboard was her name. Block letters. Clean. Filled with what had once been white paint and had faded to near invisible against the wood. Junia. She stood in the doorway of that room. The wind moved somewhere far above her. Through the pines around the tower, she could no longer see. The copper roof 90 feet up, catching the last of the afternoon light, she could no longer see either. But she did not need to see any of it to know exactly where she was. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had been supposed to be here for 22 years. She had simply not known it until now. She sat on the edge of the child-sized bed, not counting the minutes, not able to. The crayon drawing was still in her hand. 2 stick figures, the taller one holding the smaller one's hand. Her own handwriting at the top from a version of herself she did not remember being. Me and Grandma Elmira. Junia set the drawing back inside the little wooden box. She closed the lid. She placed the box exactly where it had been on the dresser, because that felt important. Because someone had put it there with care, and care was a thing she recognized even when she could not name it. She stood up. The cold of the concrete floor came up through the soles of her boots. She walked back through the main living room, past the covered furniture, past the shelves lined with hundreds of books. She had not looked closely at the books yet. She would. Later. When she could breathe again. Right now, she had one job: find the tape. Because the tape was what her grandmother had staged. The tape was the first thing, and her grandmother had been a woman who arranged things in order. She went back to the archive room. The heavy door stood a quarter-inch ajar, just the way it had been. The way Elmira had left it deliberately for someone with hands that would not know at first what to do with them. Junia pushed it open. The room was still as she had left it. Shelves floor to ceiling on 3 walls, 2 computer terminals from the late 90s, a cassette player of the kind made for transcription, a rack of videotapes above it, and on the central table 1 banker's box pulled forward, left open, waiting. She approached the table. On top of the folders in the corner of a videotape case sat a thick envelope, her name across the front, the same careful cursive, the ink slightly faded. She sat down in the office chair. The foam had compressed to almost nothing. The chair creaked under her weight, the sound of a thing that had been patient for many years. She opened the envelope. 12 pages of paper, folded in thirds, covered front and back in her grandmother's handwriting. Dated. The first page carried a date from 7 years ago. The last page carried a date from 4 months before Elmira died. Beneath the pages was a small paper sleeve. Inside the sleeve was a cassette tape. On the label in that same hand for Junia, play first. Her hands were steady. She noticed this and did not know what to do with the noticing. She should have been shaking. She was not shaking. She looked at the transcription player. She pressed the eject button. The door opened. She slid the tape inside. She pressed the door shut. She found the play button. She pressed it. A moment of hiss, the sound of blank tape running. Then, a voice. It was not the voice she had imagined. She had imagined something thin, frail, the voice of a very old woman at the end of everything. What she heard was steady, deliberate, with a slight roughness in the lower register that came from years of mountain air and outdoor work and never minding either. A Pacific Northwest accent by way of somewhere older. Flat, careful diction. A person who did not waste words. My name is Almira Louise Trescott. Junia's breath caught. I am recording this in the spring, and I do not expect to see another one. I am leaving this tape for my granddaughter, Junia Kettering, who will be 22 years old when she hears it, if I have arranged things correctly. A pause, the tape hissed on. I have arranged things correctly. I have had 19 years to arrange them, and I am not a careless woman. Junia reached over, spread the pages of the letter on the table. The written words and the spoken words moved together. Almira had read from an earlier draft when she recorded, and revised the written version afterward. I am going to tell you the truth now. All of it. I owe you that much, and a great deal more than that. But the truth is what I have to give, and I am going to give it plainly, because you are my granddaughter, and I believe you are strong enough to hold it. You come from people who were strong enough to hold hard truths. I believe it traveled. Junia's hand went to her mouth. Because no one had ever said that to her before. You come from people. Not you are a state file. Not you are a case number. Not you are what remains after other people have made decisions about what to do with you. You come from people. She pressed the pause button, just for a moment, just to breathe. Then she pressed play again. Your mother's name was Lisette Ann Trescott Kettering. She was 31 years old when she died. She was a journalist, not the kind that covers ribbon cuttings, the kind who spends 2 years on a single story, because she knew it mattered, and she was going to get it exactly right, no matter what it took, and no matter how long. Junia was writing on the back of one of the letter pages. She did not remember picking up the pen. Her hand had done it while her mind was still catching up. Lisette Ann Trescott Kettering. She wrote it out. Then she wrote it again, because she wanted the shape of it in her hand, because a name written twice becomes a fact. Your father's name was Thane James Kettering. He was a research scientist, environmental chemistry. He worked for an independent university consortium that did water quality testing, which means he was not employed by industry and could not be leaned on by industry, which is precisely why your mother chose him, when she needed someone whose data could not be questioned or purchased or made to go away. Junia wrote her father's name, slowly, the way you write a word in a language you are learning. They met at a conference. Your mother was covering agricultural runoff in the Central Valley. Your father was presenting research. She told me later that she knew within the first 10 minutes that he was the most rigorous person she had ever met in her life, and that she found this quality entirely irresistible. A faint sound on the tape. It might have been a laugh. Junia rewound, played it again. It was a laugh, a quiet one. The laugh of a woman remembering something small and beautiful. They were married 14 months later. You were born the year after that. Junia set the pen down. She could not write anymore. Her chest felt like it had a stone inside it, and the stone was warm, which did not make sense. Stones were not warm. The tape went on. When you were 2 years old, your father found something in the water. The voice changed. Something tightened in it. He was conducting independent sampling in 4 counties across 3 states. Standard monitoring, the kind of work that generates data no one reads, unless something forces them to. Junia leaned forward. But what he found in the water table in certain rural areas did not match any natural geological signature. It was industrial, specific chemical compounds that could only come from the improper disposal of manufacturing waste. And the concentrations were not trace amounts. They were high enough to explain certain patterns in the public health data for those same areas. Almira paused, then went on. Elevated cancer rates, neurological disorders in children, Health outcomes the county health departments had been recording faithfully for a decade and attributing to everything except the actual cause. Junia's hands were cold. He traced the disposal sites. It took him 18 months of careful, unrewarded work. Then he traced the company responsible. It was Black Pine Terra Holdings. The name landed in the room like a drop tool. Black Pine. The offer. The $18,000. The 7 neighboring parcels Osmond had said were gone. Black Pine. Junia paused the tape. She stood up. She walked to the far wall of the archive room. Then she walked back. She sat down. She pressed play. At the time, Almira said Black Pine was not primarily a real estate company. It was the land acquisition and disposal arm of a larger chemical manufacturing conglomerate. The resort development came later, as rebranding. What they were doing in those years was acquiring remote rural parcels cheaply, land with no utilities, no road access, no neighbors who could afford lawyers, and using those parcels as unlicensed disposal sites. Junia's stomach turned. For chemical waste that would have cost them tens of millions of dollars to handle legally and properly, they had been doing it for more than 20 years. She thought about the water in every rural town she had lived in, the water in Cottage 7, which had always tasted slightly wrong. She pushed the thought away. She would come back to it. Not now. Your father had proof, soil core samples, water table analyses, chain of custody documentation for the waste itself, internal shipping manifests he obtained through a source inside the company. He had mapped 11 active disposal sites across 4 states. He had connected each site to specific health outcomes in the surrounding communities. Almira's voice was steady, calm, the way a person is calm when they have said something many times to themselves, until the saying no longer breaks them. The documentation was, in his own words, airtight. A pause. Your mother was writing the story. Junia sat very still. They knew it was dangerous work. They were not naive. They took precautions. They made copies of all the primary source material and distributed those copies to people they trusted. One set came to me. I did not know at the time the full extent of what it contained. I knew it was important, and I knew I was to keep it safe and tell no one under any circumstances. The tape hissed. In the fall of the year you turned 3, your parents drove north to meet with their source a final time. He had additional internal documents that had not yet been transferred. They were coming back the same night. Junia already knew what came next, because she had lived the shape of it her whole life. But she did not know the details, and the details were what her grandmother had come here to give her. They did not come back. A silence on the tape, longer than the others, as if Almira had needed a moment, as if she had needed to press pause on her own recording, and had come back. The Highway Patrol report described a logging truck that lost its brakes on a mountain grade, head-on collision at a curve with no guardrail, both vehicles destroyed. Your parents were killed instantly. The truck driver survived with minor injuries and disappeared from the area within 1 week of the accident. The investigation was closed in 30 days. Junia had stopped breathing at some point. She started again, because you had to. I knew it was not an accident. Junia closed her eyes. I knew because 3 days before they drove north, your mother called me. She told me they had been followed, that there had been an approach, a man who met your father at a gas station, and made very clear without saying anything that could be recorded or repeated in a legal proceeding that the story should not be published, and would not benefit anyone if it were. Junia opened her eyes. Her father had walked into that meeting anyway. Her father had walked into that meeting knowing. Your father had reported this to the university. The university's legal counsel had advised him to suspend the research pending review. Your mother was furious. She told me they were going anyway. She told me that if anything happened, I was to take you and the evidence and disappear completely. The tape hissed on. I took the evidence, I put you in the car, and I drove for 3 days. And I did not stop except for gas. Junia's hands were flat on the table in front of her. She was 3 years old. She was in the passenger seat of her grandmother's car. She was watching the country move past the window. She did not remember any of it. Some part of her body remembered, the way skin remembers being held. But I could not keep you with me. The voice on the tape shifted, slowed, became something more careful. I want you to understand why. I am asking you to understand something that I am not certain can be understood, only accepted. And I am asking for your forgiveness alongside the understanding. Junia's throat felt like something was inside it that would not go down. Black Pine had resources and reach. They had already demonstrated in the clearest possible terms what they were willing to do to protect what they had built. If I kept you with me, you were a target. You were the daughter of the people who held the evidence. And you were 3 years old. And I was a 61-year-old woman alone on a mountain with no protection and no plan beyond hiding. I could not protect you and protect the evidence and protect myself, all at the same time. Junia was crying. She had not noticed starting. But if you were no one, if you were a ward of the state, a name in a file cabinet, moved from one facility to another on a schedule I could not predict and they could not follow, then you were invisible to them. The words came clearly through the tape, as if the years had not touched them. They were not looking for an orphan. They were looking for Almira Trescott's granddaughter. Junia bent forward. Her forehead touched the edge of the table. So I made you an orphan. She stayed there, bent, her forehead against the wood. The tape kept playing above her. I drove you to the county facility in Bakersfield on a Tuesday morning in October. I signed the forms. I kissed your forehead. You were wearing a yellow jacket with small wooden buttons, and you smelled like the soap we had used at the motel the night before. You did not cry when I left. You watched me go with your mother's eyes, wide open and steady, and you did not cry. And I have not stopped thinking about that moment for 19 years. Junia lifted her head. It was the bravest thing I ever saw, and you were 3 years old, and you did not even know you were being brave. A hiss, then Almira's voice quieter, as if she had leaned closer to the recorder. Every year on your birthday, I drove to Bakersfield. I parked on the street outside the facility. I stayed for an hour, just to know you were still there, just to count one more year of you being safe in the world. Junia thought about her birthdays. She thought about the small ones, the ones no one noticed, the ones where she ate a cupcake alone in the cafeteria, or received a card signed by 3 staff members she did not know well. Her grandmother had been outside, every single one, for 19 years. I am sorry, Junia. I am sorry for every year. I am sorry for every birthday I watched from a car window on a public street, instead of across a table in a room where you could see me. I am sorry for every time you needed someone, and there was no one. I built this place for us. I built it so that when the time was right, we could live here together, hidden and safe, while we worked out what to do with what your parents had left. But the time was never quite right. And I was never quite brave enough to risk bringing you into this before you were old enough to choose it for yourself. The tape hissed. The evidence is in this room, all of it. Your father's data, your mother's reporting, the source documentation, the recorded testimony of the man who gave them the inside information, a chemical engineer named Gideon Trask, who worked inside Black Pine for 11 years and knew in precise technical detail where the bodies were buried, in every sense of that phrase. Junia wrote the name, Gideon Trask. Gideon disappeared in 2007. I believe he is still alive. I believe he went to ground for exactly the same reason I did. Junia underlined the name twice. In the bottom drawer of this table, there is a lockbox. The combination is your birthday, month and day and year. Inside is money. What remained of your parents' savings after I used the rest to build this place. It is enough to go anywhere in the world and start over, and never look back at any of this. That is one choice. A pause. The other choice is this room. The tape hissed, a steady breath of nothing. Whatever you decide, know this, without any doubt. I never abandoned you. Every day of every year I knew where you were, and I loved you without stopping, not for a single day. Junia was crying openly now, silent tears, the kind she had trained herself into as a child, because loud tears in a group home cost you things. This land, this place, this archive, it is the last thing I had to give you. It is everything I had. Be careful, my Junia, and be brave. You come from people who were both. The tape clicked. The player stopped. Junia sat in the archive. The cold of the room settled around her shoulders like a coat. She thought about the yellow jacket with small wooden buttons. She did not remember it, but she believed in it, because a woman who had waited 19 years outside a building did not misremember a jacket. She reached over and opened the bottom drawer of the work table. The lockbox was there, black metal, small enough to lift with one hand. She turned the dial. Her month, her day, her year. The lid opened. Inside, in vacuum-sealed plastic stacked in neat bundles. Cash. More cash than she had ever seen in one place. She did not count it. Not yet. She closed the lid. She pushed the drawer shut. Then she went back to the box on the table. She began to work. She did not call anyone. She did not know yet who could be trusted. And that was not a question to answer carelessly, because Black Pine was a company that had killed 2 people and walked away without consequence, which meant they had access at levels she could not yet see, and influence in places she could not yet map. She would understand what she had first, then she would decide what to do with it. She started with her father's research, scientific reports, data tables, chain of custody logs, lab analyses from the University Consortium's testing facility, certified and dated. She read them slowly. Her father's writing was precise, unadorned. He stated what he had found, how he had found it, what it meant. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The number said everything. She copied the disposal site coordinates by hand onto a blank page. She drew a rough map from memory. 4 states, 11 sites. She marked each one with a small circle. Then she opened her mother's box. Lizette Kettering had been a different kind of writer entirely. Where Thane was restrained, Lizette was relentless. Her notes filled margins, ran off the edges of pages, continued on the backs, and sometimes on separate pages tucked into folders. Interview transcripts, typed, with handwritten corrections and additions that sometimes overwhelmed the type. A timeline of Black Pine's land acquisitions going back 23 years, cross-referenced with public health records from the surrounding counties, lists of names, company executives, local officials, politicians whose campaign finance records showed contributions from Black Pine subsidiaries. A web of connection her mother had been building patiently for 2 years. Junia read for hours. She did not eat. She did not notice being hungry. At some point, she reached over, pressed play on one of the interview tapes from the cardboard box. She heard her mother's voice for the first time. It was not what she had expected. She had expected something soft, something that matched the laughing woman in the photograph. What she heard was patient, precise, and absolutely unyielding. Her mother was conducting an interview. She was pressing a source. She was pushing back on evasions. Her calm did not waver. Junia listened. Something inside her shifted position, like a stone that had been sitting in one shape too long, turning over, settling into a new shape. She had her mother's eyes. Almira had said so. She had her mother's calm too. She had always known that about herself. She had thought it came from institutions, from the trained flatness of a person who could not afford emotion. Now she understood. It had come from further back than that. She listened to her mother work. And she understood in the specific way that only a daughter understands why Elmira had said Lisette was the best. She rewound the tape. Then she pressed play again, just to hear her mother's voice one more time, before she moved on. The videotape was at the bottom of the box. The case was clear plastic, the label typed, G. Trask, primary testimony, recorded November. The date was 8 months before her parents died. Junia crossed the room. She pressed the power button on the VHS player mounted in the wall unit. A red standby light came on. She fed the tape into the slot. It caught. Drew in with the sound of old machinery doing what it was built to do. The screen came to life. Static. Then it stabilized. A plain room, a table, 2 chairs, a single lamp providing all the light. The camera on a tripod. No camera person. In one chair sat a woman she recognized immediately. Her mother, younger, hair pulled back, a legal pad on the table. The posture of a woman who had done this many times. In the other chair sat a man. He was in his 50s, heavy set, the posture of someone who had spent years trying to take up less space than he physically occupied. His face was partially obscured by the angle of the lamp. Junia understood immediately. That was deliberate. It had been agreed on in advance. He identified himself as Gideon Trask, chemical process engineer. 11 years with the waste management division of the company that would later reorganize and rebrand as Black Pine Terra Holdings. He spoke for 2 hours and 18 minutes. Junia watched every minute of it. He described in precise technical language what the company had been doing. The acquisition strategy for remote rural parcels, the transportation logistics using unmarked contracted vehicles, the excavation of disposal pits, the chemical stabilization process, the burial and concealment, the monitoring of the sites to ensure containment. He described it the way a person describes a process they have performed repeatedly over many years. He described the internal documentation system, the falsified safety reports filed with state environmental agencies, reports that described legal disposal at certified facilities, while the actual waste went to the concealed rural sites. He described the internal coding system used to track the illegal locations, a system he had been personally responsible for maintaining for 3 years. He described the health outcomes in the surrounding communities that the company had been tracking internally, and had chosen to manage through influence rather than remediation, strategic donations to county health departments, retainer agreements with local law firms, occasional quiet cash settlements with families who made noise, always accompanied by non-disclosure clauses. Junia took notes as she watched. At the end of the tape, his voice dropped, until it was barely audible. He described a conversation he had been present for, a meeting in an executive conference room where the name Kettering had come up. Junia's breath stopped, where he had understood from what was said and what was carefully not said, that the people who held information about Black Pine's operations had become a problem, and that the problem was going to be resolved. He had gone into that meeting not knowing what kind of meeting it was. He had left it knowing he was not safe. He had given Lisette everything he had, and then he had disappeared. His plan was to wait until the story was published, then surface, give full testimony in whatever legal proceedings followed. He had trusted her completely. The tape ended. Junia sat in the dim room until the monitor returned to static. She thought about a man who had trusted her mother completely, who had disappeared 19 years ago, and had, so far as anyone knew, never come back. She stood up, ejected the tape, placed it back in its case, set it beside her father's data. Then she began going through the filing cabinets. She worked through the night and into the following morning. She built the complete picture from its component parts. The scientific data established the contamination and its source. Her mother's reporting established the corporate structure in the chain of decision-making. Gideon Trask's testimony established the internal documentation and the deliberate concealment. The chain of custody records showed that none of the primary material had been altered or compromised in the years it had been stored here. It had been waiting for someone to pick it up and carry it forward. She began to organize. She created a logical sequence for the material. She pulled the documents that were most critical. She separated them from the supporting material. She labeled everything she touched in her own hand, adding her labels to Elmira's, creating a second layer of documentation. She found a portable scanner in a cabinet below the work table. Old but functional, but she used it to create digital copies of the primary documents, saving the files to a thumb drive from a bag of blank drives she found in the same cabinet. Elmira had thought of everything, including the possibility that whoever came after her would need to duplicate the archive quickly. She made 2 copies. She was going through the last box of her mother's files when she noticed it, an unlabeled box. At the back of the lowest shelf, pushed behind 2 other boxes, the cardboard slightly less yellowed than everything around it, which meant it had been placed there later than the rest of the archive. She pulled it out. She opened it. Inside, a single manila folder. Inside the folder, a document approximately 30 pages long, printed on heavyweight paper, a cover page bearing a corporate seal she recognized. Black Pine Terra Holdings, LLC. Below the seal, Ashen Ridge Valley Acquisition and Development Agreement. Below that, the parties, Black Pine Terra Holdings, LLC, and the Office of the Havelock County Board of Supervisors. Signed, dated, notarized, 2019. Junia read the document from the first page to the last, without stopping. It was not a resort development agreement in any meaningful sense. The resort was present, yes, described in 3 pages of architectural summary and projected economic impact numbers. But it was the frame, the presentation layer, the thing you showed county supervisors and local newspapers and chambers of commerce. What the body of the document actually established was a comprehensive land use agreement. That included provisions for what was described in a technical appendix as remediation staging, defined using language she now recognized precisely from her father's research. Remediation staging, the storage and processing of legacy industrial materials in designated subsurface containment areas. They were not coming to Ashen Ridge to build a resort. They were coming to Ashen Ridge to bury more waste. The resort was the cover. The real plan was in the technical appendix, in her land. The 72 acres Elmira had bought and held and paid taxes on for years was identified in the appendix by parcel number, as one of the 3 primary staging areas. That was why the offer kept rising. Not because they wanted a golf course, because her land was where they needed to put what they could not afford to let anyone find. Junia set the document down. She sat with that a moment. They had offered her $18,000. Then presumably they would offer more. For a site they needed as the cornerstone of a plan worth hundreds of millions in avoided disposal costs. For a piece of land sitting directly above an underground archive containing years of preserved evidence of their crimes. She added the county agreement to the priority box, added it to the thumb drive copies. Then she heard the sound above her. It came through 50 feet of granite and concrete and pine-needled earth, muffled, distorted by distance, but identifiable. Vehicles, multiple engines idling, then going quiet, doors opening, doors closing. Junia looked at her phone. Late afternoon. She had been in the archive for nearly 24 hours. She climbed the ladder carefully, keeping her footsteps quiet on the rungs. She raised the hatch just enough to see out at ground level. 3 black SUVs. Not 2. 3. Parked at the edge of the property where the fire road met the boundary. Clean vehicles, the kind that belonged in city parking structures and knew it. 4 men she did not recognize, standing near them. And Sterling Pryke. She recognized him from a photograph she had seen in her mother's files. A profile piece the state bar had run on his firm 5 years ago. He was shorter than she had imagined, compact, deliberate in his physicality. He was standing at the base of the fire road, holding a document case, looking up the slope. He knew she was here. He was not knocking. He was not calling out. He was just standing there, letting her see him, letting her know he had come in person. Junia held very still. She watched. After a few minutes, one of the men walked up the slope, toward the base of the tower. He carried a manila envelope. He set it on the concrete step at the tower door. Then he walked back to the SUVs, not looking around. Pryke stayed at the fire road, watching the tower. He raised one hand. He waved once, not aggressively, almost cordially, like a man greeting an acquaintance across a distance. Then he got into the middle SUV. All three vehicles started their engines and drove back down the fire road. Junia waited until the sound was completely gone. She climbed out, lowered the hatch behind her, concealed it carefully, walked to the tower door. The envelope bore the letterhead of a law firm in Sacramento. Not Pryke's firm, another one, because that was cleaner. She opened it standing on the granite shelf. In the last of the afternoon light, it purported to be a court order, a temporary injunction, issued by the Havelock County Superior Court, requiring her to vacate the property within 72 hours, pending resolution of a title dispute filed by Black Pine Terra Holdings. She folded it, put it in her jacket pocket. She stood at the base of the tower, looked out at the pines, looked at the valley below, looked at the road disappearing into the trees. No power, no cell signal reliable enough to trust, no road access they had not now effectively blocked. No one who knew she was here except Osmond Bellwether, and she had no way to reach him without walking 5 miles down the same road Black Pine's vehicles had just used. She was 22 years old and alone on a mountain, with 2 thumb drives and a box of documents and no plan. Then she heard the second vehicle, not black, not new, an old station wagon, the kind that had wood paneling on the sides, coming up the fire road at a much slower pace than the SUVs had. She stepped back against the tower wall, watched. The wagon rounded the last curve, stopped in the small clearing at the base of the tower. The driver's door opened. An older woman got out. She was 74, compact, white hair cut short, wearing a canvas work coat and hiking boots. She moved with the deliberate economy of a woman who had spent decades on her feet in hospitals. She carried a metal box. She walked up to the granite shelf, stopped 10 feet from Junia. She waited. "Junia," she said, "my name is Marigold Halpern. I was your grandmother's oldest friend." Junia did not move. "She told me to wait," the woman said. "She told me you would come here, and when you did that, you would need me. So I've been waiting." Junia stepped forward. Marigold Halpern looked at her. "You have her eyes," Marigold said. "The Trescott eyes, the way they don't quite blink when they should." Junia said, "How did you know I was here?" "Osmond called me the day you walked into his store. He didn't know who I was. He knew exactly who you were. He knew the moment you said Trescott. He knew who you were from your grandmother's cheekbones. She had cheekbones you couldn't forget." Junia looked at the metal box. "What is that?" "A copy," Marigold said. "A copy of what? Everything." Junia stared at her. "Almira and I made 2 copies of the archive. One stays underground, in case something happened to me or my house burned, or I died before the day came. The other stays in my cellar, under a fireproof floor safe I paid a man in Reading to install in 1998, in case something happened to the archive, to the tower, to this whole mountain." Marigold shifted the box in her hands. "I've been holding this for 19 years, Junia. She told me, she said, wait, do not open, do not touch, do not read. Wait for the day the granddaughter comes, and when she comes, bring the box up the road, because 2 copies traveling separately are twice as hard to bury." Junia's throat closed. "You knew about me." "I knew every year, honey. She and I sat in my kitchen every October 23rd. We drank tea. She told me you were still there, that she had seen the light in the second-floor window, that you were still safe." October 23rd. Your birthday. Junia sat down on the concrete step. Not fell. Sat. Marigold walked forward. She set the metal box down beside her. Then she sat down. She did not touch her. She did not say anything else. She just sat. The way a woman of 74 sits when she has waited a very long time to sit next to the young woman she has been waiting for. Junia said, "There was a man here." "I know, I passed him on the road." "He left this." She pulled the folded injunction from her jacket, handed it to Marigold. Marigold read it, slowly. She had reading glasses on a lanyard around her neck. She pushed them up. She folded the paper. She handed it back. "That's not a real court order," she said. "I know." "You know, I couldn't prove it, but I've read enough of my mother's files by now to recognize the shape of one that isn't." Marigold looked at her. "Your grandmother would be proud of that sentence," she said. Junia looked down at the paper in her hand. Then she looked at Marigold. "Do you know anyone who can help us?" "Yes," Marigold said. "Who?" "Her name is at the back of the letter your grandmother left you." Junia thought about it. There had been a name at the back. She had read past it. She had not been ready. "I read it," she said. "Ozias Trelawney, attorney at law. He's expecting your call." "Since when?" "Since 2011. Almira and I sat in his office, all three of us. She gave him a folder, told him, 'When my granddaughter calls this number, drop everything,' he said. 'Yes, ma'am.' And he meant it." Junia stared at Marigold. Marigold's face did not change. "Junia, my old friend spent 19 years arranging a defense for you before you knew you needed one. She thought about every angle, every path, every door they might come through, every door you might need to walk out of. She thought about it before she went to bed each night, and when she woke up in the morning. She thought about you the way most people think about air, as a thing that had to be there or nothing else worked." Junia's hands were trembling now. She had not trembled when she first heard the tape. She had not trembled when she read the county agreement. She had not trembled when Sterling Pike waved at her from the fire road. She trembled now because it had finally landed all at once. What her grandmother had done, and how long she had done it, and how many people she had asked to help, and how many people had said yes. Marigold sat beside her. The pines moved in the wind. Somewhere in the valley below, a hawk called once, twice, and then stopped. "There's a phone," Marigold said. "In the archive. Almira put in a hardwired line, runs down the mountain along the old fire crew right-of-way, comes out at my sister-in-law's barn 3 miles east, then jumps onto the regular line at the county road. It's untraceable through any cell network, because it isn't one." "A phone." "An old rotary, on the wall by the pantry. You didn't see it because it's behind the door when the door's open." Junia laughed. She did not mean to. It came out of her before she could stop it. Marigold smiled. "That's the first laugh anybody's had in that archive," Marigold said. "I think it was overdue." The sun was going down. The valley was turning the color of copper and old brass. The pines went dark first. Then the mountains held light a little longer. Then they let it go too. Junia said, "I have to call him." "Yes." "Tonight." "Yes." "And you'll wait." "I'll wait as long as you need me to." Junia stood up. She picked up the metal box. She looked at Marigold. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, for every October 23rd. Marigold's eyes filled. She did not let the tears go. She just held them there, the way women of her generation held things that were too big to spill. "She'd have wanted to be here for this part," Marigold said, "the part where you say thank you." "She is here," Junia said. "In a way, she is." Marigold nodded once. Junia carried the box back to the tower. She did not lower it to the ground while she opened the hatch. She held it against her hip, balancing it with her other hand. She climbed down the ladder with the box in one arm. At the bottom, she set it on the concrete floor. She opened the vault door. She carried the box through into the archive. She set it on the work table beside her grandmother's box. She opened the lid. Inside were duplicates. Everything. Scientific data, journalism, Trask's testimony, the county agreement, and on top of everything, a second letter, written in Almira's hand, but addressed to Marigold. Junia read the first line. Dear Mari, if you are giving her this box, it means the day has come. Junia sat down in the office chair. The tape hissed nothing at her from the player. The room was silent. Through the ceiling and the granite and the pine-needled earth, she could not hear the wind moving in the trees above. She could not hear Marigold sitting patiently at the base of the tower. But she could feel both. The way you feel a hand you cannot see. She turned to the phone. The rotary, on the wall by the pantry, behind the door, just as Marigold had said. She picked up the receiver. She held it against her ear. There was a dial tone. The line was live, waiting. She dialed the number she had memorized from the back of her grandmother's letter. 4 rings, then a voice, rough, alert. The voice of a man who did not sleep deeply and had made his peace with that. Trelawney. Mr. Trelawney, Junia said. My name is Junia Kettering. My grandmother was Almira Trescott. I'm calling from the archive. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man who did not understand. It was the silence of a man who had been waiting, not expecting, but waiting, to hear exactly those words. Don't move, he said. Don't go above ground until I tell you it's clear. I'll be there by morning. Junia set the receiver back on the hook. She stood there in the archive with her hand still on the receiver. The line was live. She had picked up. It had rung. Someone had answered. For the first time in her life, someone had answered on the first call. She turned. She looked at the room. Her father's data. Her mother's reporting. Her grandmother's log. Marigold's backup box. Gideon Trask's face frozen in static on the monitor. All of it. Every piece. She walked back to the ladder. She climbed up. Marigold was sitting on the concrete step of the tower, hands folded in her lap, looking at the sky. Junia sat down next to her. Marigold did not look over. Well, she said, he's coming by morning. Then we've got a long night to wait. Will you stay? I brought a thermos and 2 cheese sandwiches. I brought them for exactly this. Junia looked at the sky above the tower. The stars were coming out slowly, one at a time, the way stars do when the light finally lets them. She thought about her father walking into a gas station meeting knowing he would not walk out safely. She thought about her mother, 31 years old, at a table with a single lamp, asking Gideon Trask the questions that mattered. She thought about her grandmother in a parked car on a Bakersfield street, every October 23rd, for 19 years. And she thought about Marigold, who had sat in a kitchen every October 23rd for those same 19 years, drinking tea, listening to a friend describe the light in a second-floor window of an institution. 2 women, old friends, waiting together for her. She had not been alone. Not once, not for a single one of those years. She had just not known. She reached over, very carefully, as if the gesture might break if she moved too fast. She took Marigold's hand. Marigold's hand was thin and warm, and she squeezed back once, very lightly, the way a nurse squeezes a hand when there is nothing left to say. They sat like that, while the stars filled in above the ashen beacon, while the copper crown turned black against the last light, while the pines went dark. And somewhere down the mountain in a Sacramento office building, Sterling Pryke was drafting his next move, believing he had 72 hours. He did not know about the phone in the pantry. He did not know about the station wagon. He did not know about Marigold Halpern. He was about to find out. Ozias Trelawney arrived at first light. She heard his truck on the fire road before she saw it. A single engine coming up at a pace that was neither hurried nor cautious. The pace of a man who had made his decision and was acting on it without drama. She had climbed out of the tower before dawn and was sitting on the granite shelf beside the base when he came through the trees. He was older than his voice had suggested, 70 or very close to it. Lean, the deliberate build of a man who had never stopped moving and had no intention of starting. White hair cut short, a face weathered by decades of something more demanding than ordinary weather. Canvas work coat, leather satchel over one shoulder. He walked up the granite shelf without stopping to catch his breath. He looked at her, then he looked at the tower, at the concrete rising 90 feet into the morning sky, at the copper crown catching the first light of day. He said only one thing. She said she would build it. I did not entirely believe her. Marigold was still there. She had slept 2 hours in the wagon and come up the granite shelf at daybreak with a fresh thermos and a bag of biscuits. She met Trelawney at the tower door, nodded once. He nodded back. It was the acknowledgement of two people who had done business before and had done it correctly. Junia showed him down. He did not speak for the first hour. He moved through the archive the way she imagined her mother had moved into a new investigation. Methodically, touching nothing until he understood the organizational system. Then working through it left to right with his reading glasses on and a notepad open in his hand. He read the documents she had flagged, watched 15 minutes of Gideon Trask's testimony standing in front of the monitor with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Read the Havelock County agreement from cover page to the last line of the technical appendix. Then read the appendix a second time. Then he sat down across from her at the work table. Your mother, he said, was the best journalist I never got to work with. He said it plainly, a fact he had held for many years. I knew about the Kettering investigation. In 2007, when it disappeared, I made inquiries through every channel I had. I was told the evidence had been lost in the accident. I was told there was nothing left to pursue. He looked at the rows of boxes, the shelving units. Your grandmother was the most patient woman in American legal history. He picked up his notepad. Here's what we have. Primary scientific data establishing contamination and source. Chain of custody intact. Investigative reporting establishing corporate structure and decision-making. Whistleblower testimony naming specific executives. And a 2019 county agreement that establishes current criminal intent and implicates elected county officials. He set the notepad down. Here is what they have. Money, lawyers, 19 years of experience making inconvenient things disappear, and the institutional confidence of people who have done this before and faced no consequences. He looked at her steadily. That injunction they served you is fraudulent. I know every judge in Havelock County, and none of them signed that document. I would have been contacted by the court if a legitimate title dispute had been filed under my client's name. He paused. They do not yet know what is in this room. If they knew, they would not be serving paper. They would be doing something significantly more serious. What would they be doing? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her directly. Something we are not going to give them the opportunity to do. He laid out the strategy, not a plan he had arrived with, one he built in front of her, out loud, testing each element as he stated it, adjusting when she pointed out problems she had identified in the archive. She pointed out two specific issues in the first 20 minutes that changed his assessment of the sequencing. Each time he stopped and reconsidered, without resistance, and adjusted. He was not managing her. He was working with her. And the distinction was clear and mutual from the first few minutes. The fraudulent injunction would be handled through his contacts in the county court system. Her legal standing on the property would be formally asserted immediately. And then the EPA. He looked at the county agreement. This document implicates the county in a federal environmental crime on its face as written. The moment it reaches a federal agency, the jurisdictional picture changes entirely. Black Pine has influence at the county level. They have maintained that influence for years. They do not have the same influence at the federal level. And more importantly, a federal investigation supersedes everything they can manufacture locally. Who do we take it to? He named a specific investigator at the EPA regional office in Sacramento, a woman named Rosalie Waite. He had worked with her on 2 previous cases. But, he said, and he looked at her directly, I am not going to be the one to take it to her. She looked back at him. The chain of custody on this document runs from Elmira to you. You found it. You removed it from this archive. You have held it. If I present it, Black Pine's lawyers will challenge the chain at every step and manufacture something to argue about. If you present it, the chain is clean. You are the documented heir to the property. You discovered the document on the property you legally own. You brought it to the attention of the relevant federal authority. There is no argument. He wrote the investigator's name on a card, slid it across the table. I will call her tonight. You go tomorrow. I will be filing our counter-response to the fraudulent injunction while you're in Sacramento. We move simultaneously on both fronts. Black Pine will not know which direction to look first. She picked up the card. Read it. What if they follow me? He allowed himself something close to a smile. Then they are 40 miles away from this archive while you are walking in the front door of a federal building. Either way, we benefit from the situation. That afternoon, they made preparations. Trelawney called Rosalie Waite from the pantry phone, spoke for 11 minutes, set the appointment for 8:45 the next morning, then called 2 other people at numbers she did not recognize, made arrangements she did not entirely understand and did not need to. Marigold made coffee, made lunch out of what Osmond had put in the wagon 2 nights before, kept her hands busy, kept her voice low. The steady presence of a nurse who had learned decades ago that anxious people need less fuss around them and more calm. When the light began to fail, they sat together on the granite shelf, all 3 of them, watched the valley go dark. Trelawney said, Junior, you should understand something before tomorrow. She waited. The people you are about to hand this to, they are competent and they are honest, but they are also constrained by procedure. They cannot promise you anything. They can only promise you they will look at what you bring them. And if what you bring them is what I think it is, procedure will do the rest. But that takes time. Weeks, months, sometimes longer. It will not feel like justice happening in the room. It will feel like paperwork being filed and questions being asked. That is what justice looks like when it is real. I know, she said. He looked at her. He nodded once. Your grandmother told me you would. Marigold made her sleep 4 hours in the small bed under her carved name. Because someone had to. Because Junior would not have thought to sleep at all. Marigold sat in the office chair with the logbook open on her lap and read Elmira's construction notes by the light of a small lamp. She had helped carry the concrete forms up this ridge. She recognized the entries. She knew the days. She woke Junior at 4 in the morning with a hand on the shoulder and a cup of coffee in the other hand. Junior drove to Sacramento before dawn. Marigold rode with her, which surprised her, because Marigold had not asked. She had simply climbed into the passenger seat of Trelawney's borrowed truck at 4 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag of biscuits. You do not go into a room like that alone, Marigold said. Elmira would have skinned me. The sky went from dark blue to gray to the hard, clear gold of early morning. The mountains shrank in the rearview mirror as they descended, until they were a clean line on the horizon, and then nothing. Junior had the Havelock County agreement in a sealed envelope on the seat between them. She had her deed, her identification, Trelawney's card, the thumb drives, the steel box in the truck bed under a canvas tarp. She thought about her father as she drove. 18 months of independent sampling work no one was paying attention to, following a chemical signature through water tables across state lines, doing the kind of careful, unrewarded work that is only possible if you believe the work matters more than whether anyone notices you doing it. She thought about the gas station conversation, the man who had made himself clear without saying anything recordable, her father going anyway. She thought about Almira sitting in a parked car on a street in Bakersfield once a year for 19 years. She parked in a structure 2 blocks from the Federal Building on Capitol Mall at 8:45 in the morning, sat in the truck for a moment, Marigold beside her, quiet hands folded in her lap. Then she picked up the envelope and got out. The EPA regional office was on the 4th floor. The receptionist took her name, made a call. Within 10 minutes, a woman came through the security door. She was in her 50s, compact, the settled and brisk manner of someone who had spent decades working in a bureaucratic institution without being shaped by it in the way bureaucracies try to shape people. She looked at Junia, then at Marigold, then at the envelope. "Mr. Trelawney called me last night. Come in." They sat in a conference room for 2 hours. Junia laid out the material in the sequence she had established in the archive. Her father's scientific data first, then her mother's documentation of the corporate structure, then the Havelock County agreement with the technical appendix. She spoke clearly, without editorializing, stating what each document was, how it had come to be in the archive, what it demonstrated. She spoke the way her father had written his reports. Rosalie Waite did not interrupt, took precise notes, asked 3 questions, each directed at a specific evidentiary detail. Junia answered all 3 without hesitation. At the end, Rosalie sat back and looked at the documents arranged between them. "The county agreement is a federal crime. On its face is written." She tapped the technical appendix. "This language describes unpermitted subsurface disposal of regulated industrial waste. It is not ambiguous, and it does not require interpretation." She looked up. "What you have brought into this room today is not a complaint. It is a case, a fully developed federal case, with primary source documentation, a whistleblower on record, and a current agreement establishing ongoing criminal intent." Junia said she understood. "Do not discuss this with anyone outside of Mr. Trelawney. Do not respond to any contact from Black Pine or their representatives." She held Junia's gaze. "These are people who have done this before." "I know." They drove back north. The mountains grew back into the windshield as they climbed, growing from a distant line into something solid and known. And by the time they turned off the county highway onto the fire road, the trees had closed in on both sides, and the air through the cracked window carried pine and cold rock and the smell of the specific place she was returning to. She felt the particular relief of a person arriving at the only place that had ever been arranged specifically for her. Trelawney was in the archive when she climbed down. On the phone, he held up one finger, finished the call, looked at her. "The injunction has been flagged with the court administrator. 2 of the 3 signatures on it are forgeries. The 3rd is a legitimate notary stamp used without authorization." He paused. "Black Pine is going to know by end of day that the injunction will not hold." She told him about the meeting. He listened without expression. "They are going to move quickly now." He was right. 2 days later, Sterling Pryke called her directly. She was on the granite shelf outside the tower base, replacing weathered flashing at the doorframe. Methodical physical work she had been doing in the hours between time in the archive. She answered. His voice had recalibrated completely. Not warm, not cold. Careful. The voice of a man adjusting his approach based on updated information. He proposed a meeting in Sacramento, in person, at his firm's offices. He named a figure. $2 million, he said. Clear title transfer, full settlement, no further obligations on either side. When she asked, he named a date 2 days out. She said she would think about it. She told Trelawney that evening. He listened, then asked what she wanted to do. She said she wanted to go. He looked at her. "Without me. Without you." He was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who argued with decisions he understood, and she could see that he understood this one. "All right, but I need 3 days to prepare some things first. And you need to understand what that room is going to be. This is not a negotiation. A man like Pryke does not offer $2 million to negotiate. He is looking for something. I know what he is looking for. She spent the next 2 days in the archive. Not organizing, that work was done. What she was doing now was different, closer to what her father must have done in the final weeks before the drive north, going back through everything she already knew, learning it at a depth below knowledge, the way you learn the terrain of a place you intend to defend. She was making the material part of herself, so that in any room, under any pressure, it would still be there. She also wrote. She sat at the work table with a legal pad, wrote the entire case out from beginning to end, the timeline, the chain of custody, the specific regulatory violations and the statutes they violated, the names of every executive Gideon Trask had identified, their roles in the decisions, the county supervisors who had signed the 2019 agreement. She wrote it all in plain sequential language, the way you explain something you have understood completely. She wrote it twice. The second version was tighter, every word that was not necessary removed. On the evening before the meeting, Osmond Bellwether's truck came up the fire road. He got out carrying a plain cardboard box, climbed the granite shelf without hurrying, set the box down, bread, cheese, 2 apples, a thermos of coffee, a mason jar of apple cider that turned out to be very good. He sat on the concrete step at the base of the tower, and she sat beside him. They watched the dark come into the valley from the east, the stars appearing one by one as the light faded, the mountains going from shapes to presences, to something felt more than seen. After a while he said, Almira told me the last time she came into the store that she had squared everything away, said she had done everything she could do and the rest belonged to the next generation. He paused. I did not know what she meant at the time. Junia watched the stars. She left everything, every piece of it. Osmond was quiet a moment. She was a determined woman, the kind of determined that does not announce itself, just keeps going regardless. He left before 10. She watched his headlights descend the fire road and go dark in the trees. Then she went inside, lay down on the small bed under her own carved name, and slept without dreaming for the first time since she had arrived. In the morning, she drove to Sacramento. Marigold rode with her again. Neither of them mentioned it. It was already the arrangement. The offices of Pryke and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a building on K Street, the kind of building designed to communicate a specific and unmistakable message about the people who worked inside it. She rode the elevator up, gave her name to the receptionist, was shown into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. Sterling Pryke was already there. He was shorter than his voice had suggested, compact, the deliberate physicality of a man who applied the same discipline to the gym that he applied to everything else. He stood when she entered and offered his hand. She shook it. His grip was controlled, calibrated. 2 other men were at the table, both in their 40s, both with the practiced blankness of lawyers present to observe and say nothing. She sat across from Pryke. She had brought nothing with her. No bag, no folder, no document case, just her jacket and the clothes she was wearing. Pryke noted the absence. She watched him note it. He offered the tone he had prepared. Reasonable, warm. The tone of a man who genuinely regretted a misunderstanding and wanted to move past it. He described his company's interest in the region. Named the figure again. $2 million, cash settlement, 30-day close. She let him finish completely. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and placed a single USB drive on the table between them. Pryke looked at it. On that drive, she said, is a complete digital copy of an archive assembled by Almira Louise Trescott. The archive contains the original scientific data, investigative reporting, and whistleblower testimony from the Kettering investigation into Black Pine Terra Holdings. It contains chain of custody documentation for all primary materials establishing that none of the evidence has been altered or compromised. And it contains the Ashen Ridge Valley Acquisition and Development Agreement signed by your company and the Havelock County Board of Supervisors in 2019, including the full technical appendix. The room was very quiet. She looked at Pryke. His expression had not visibly changed. Something beneath it had. Copies of that drive have been prepared and sealed in packages addressed to 6 federal agencies: the EPA Regional Office, the Department of Justice Environmental and Natural Resources Division, the FBI Field Office in Sacramento, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, and 2 others. She paused. Those packages are currently in the custody of Ozias Trelawney. If I do not send a specific confirmation message to Mr. Trelawney by 6 this evening, those packages will be delivered tonight. She kept her voice level, not performing calm. She was calm, in the way you are calm when a decision has been made that cannot be unmade, and you have made your peace with it completely. I also want you to know that 5 days ago, I met with a federal EPA investigator in Sacramento and provided her with the original county agreement and technical appendix. She has opened a formal preliminary inquiry. That process is already in motion, and it is not contingent on anything that happens or does not happen in this room today. Pryke was looking at the USB drive on the table between them. My grandmother waited 19 years for this moment. She built a room underground and filled it with evidence, and she waited alone. I have had 3 weeks. She paused. I can wait 24 more hours if that is what you need, but the answer to your offer is no. The answer to every offer is no. The land is not for sale. The archive is not for sale. What is in that archive is going to reach the people who need to see it, regardless of anything you do in this room or outside of it. She stood up. The only question remaining is whether your company cooperates with the federal investigation or does not. That choice is yours, and it is the only choice you have left. She picked up the USB drive, put it back in her jacket pocket. Pryke said nothing. The 2 men on either side of him said nothing. The city spread out, enormous and indifferent behind the glass. She walked out of the conference room and down the hall and into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. She stood in the descending elevator and thought about a woman who had packed a 3-year-old child into a car on a Tuesday morning in October and driven 3 days until she found a mountain no one was watching. The lobby doors opened into the afternoon. She called Trelawney from the sidewalk. He picked up on the first ring. Send the message, hold the packages. A pause. Understood. She stood on the K Street sidewalk in the Sacramento afternoon. The sun flat and warm, the ordinary traffic of the city moving past with its ordinary noise and urgency. People going to and from things that mattered to them. The whole ordinary momentum of a weekday afternoon. Then she drove back to the mountain. What followed did not happen in dramatic reversals. That was something she came to understand clearly in the weeks that followed. How institutional accountability accumulates. How it builds not in sudden overturnings, but in the steady and deliberate aggregation of documented fact. Trelawney filed the counter-response to the fraudulent injunction. The EPA investigator opened a formal inquiry. The Department of Justice, reaching through channels Trelawney had maintained over 40 years of practice, began a parallel criminal review. And then something Junia had not planned for happened. The story got out. Not through her, not through Trelawney, not through any leak from a federal office, through Marigold Halpern. Marigold had a niece in Portland who worked in local investigative journalism. And Marigold, sitting in her kitchen one evening 7 weeks after the meeting with Pryke, had picked up the phone, called her niece, said only, "I'm going to tell you something. And when I am done telling you, you are going to make some calls of your own." The niece made the calls. The niece was thorough. She contacted the EPA press office. She contacted attorneys who had worked historical black pine cases at the state level. She contacted a public health researcher at a university in Colorado who had spent 9 years trying to publish a paper on unexplained cancer clusters in 4 rural counties across 3 states and had never been able to place the paper because no journal would accept a paper without corporate cooperation. She placed a small piece in a regional Oregon publication. The piece was 1,200 words. Careful. Sourced. It named no one who was not already on record. It described a federal environmental inquiry into a corporate land acquisition pattern in Northern California. It ran on a Thursday. By Saturday, families in 4 states had begun writing to the EPA regional office. Not one family, not two, 47. 47 households and communities Junia now knew by name from her mother's interview transcripts. Communities where the well water had changed and the explanations had never been satisfying, and the settlements had come with paperwork that said you agreed not to speak about it again. These were the families of people who had been sick for a long time, or had lost people who had been sick for a long time, and who had held on to their own documentation, their own bills, their own test results, their own letters from state agencies telling them their concerns were unfounded. They had held it all, in shoe boxes, in file cabinets, in binders on kitchen shelves, because they had not believed the answers they had been given, and they had not been able to prove they were right, and they had waited 20 years, in some cases 25. They had waited without knowing what they were waiting for, because there had been nothing yet to wait for, except the possibility that one day someone somewhere would ask the right question, and they would be ready with the answer. 47 households stood up at the same time. One of them was Idella Ravencroft. She was 68 years old, widowed, from a small town in Idaho called Fenning Crossing. Her husband, Alden Ravencroft, had worked as a millwright for 40 years, had drunk the water from their well every day of their marriage, had died in 2013 of a liver cancer that his doctor had told her quietly off the record in a hospital hallway did not fit the profile of a man his age with no risk factors. She had kept every test result, every medical bill, every letter she had written to the state health department, every polite deflection she had received in return. She wrote to the EPA regional office in July. Then she drove to Ashen Ridge. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in September in an older sedan with Idaho plates and a small suitcase in the back seat. She stopped at the general store first. Osmond Bellwether told her where to find the fire road. He also told her, without being asked, that she should not attempt the walk with her cane. He drove her up himself. She stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the tower a long moment. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried in front of strangers, but her hands were tight on the top of her cane, and her mouth was set in the particular way a mouth sets. When a person is holding something that has been held for so long, the muscles remember the shape. Junia came down from the granite shelf to meet her. The older woman held out one hand. Idella Ravencroft. I lost my husband 13 years ago. Junia took the hand. Junia Kettering. I lost my parents 19 years ago. Idella looked up at the tower. My husband kept his test results in a red binder in the top drawer of his desk. For 13 years after he died, I kept the binder in the same drawer. I could not bring myself to open it, and I could not bring myself to throw it away. She looked at Junia. I thought no one would ever ask. Junia did not know what to say. Idella squeezed her hand. You asked. The federal investigation moved with the deliberateness of something that has sufficient weight and momentum and does not need to hurry. The county agreement was confirmed as a federal environmental crime within 6 weeks of the initial filing. The EPA issued formal notices of violation for the disposal sites her father had identified and mapped, sites that field investigators now confirm were not historical, but active. The Department of Justice began a criminal inquiry into the executives Gideon Trask had named on tape in 2007. Gideon Trask surfaced 11 weeks after the meeting in Sacramento. He did not call Junia. He reached Trelawney through a chain of lawyers, a contact who knew a contact who had known Trelawney for 30 years. He had been living in a small town in Nevada under a different name since 2007. He had seen the Oregon piece, then the follow-up pieces that came after it, then the wire service item that had made it into 3 national papers. He had been waiting. He had been waiting for the archive to be opened, for someone to find what had been left there, for the right person to be standing in the right place. He had been waiting 19 years, with the same patience Elmira had applied to her vigil on the mountain. Junia met him once, in a conference room in Reno, with his attorney and Trelawney present. He was 70 now, heavier than he had appeared in the tape from 2007, with the careful and slightly formal manner of a man who had spent many years being precise about everything, because the cost of imprecision had proven itself to him in the most serious way possible. He shook her hand and held it a moment longer than a formal handshake. Your parents were the only people I ever met in this who were not afraid. They were a little afraid. They just went anyway. He looked at her, then he nodded slowly, with the recognition of someone hearing something true, stated plainly. He had 19 years of supplementary material beyond his original testimony. Documentation he had continued to compile from a distance, monitoring Black Pine's public filings and industry reports, tracking the patterns he recognized from the inside, building a supplementary record against the day the original testimony resurfaced and needed corroboration. 19 years of a man staying careful and thorough and ready, because he had made a decision that if the moment came, he was going to be fully prepared for it. The moment had come. He was ready. 3 executives of Black Pine's parent company were indicted before the end of the year. 2 others were named in a subsequent superseding indictment in the spring. The county supervisor who had signed the 2019 agreement resigned from office and was subsequently charged separately under state law. Sterling Pryke's firm withdrew from representing Black Pine in the second month of the investigation. Pryke himself was referred to the State Bar Association for his role in the fraudulent injunction. His license was suspended pending the outcome of that review. The communities in 4 states where the contamination had been documented were notified formally through the federal process, which meant they received official letters, which meant the letters could be shown to state health departments, which meant the state health departments could not deflect anymore, which meant the families who had been carrying their own documentation for 2 decades could finally hand it to someone who was legally required to look at it. Junia was not in Sacramento for any of it. She was on the mountain. She had understood from the beginning that the work of the investigation belonged to the investigators, and that her role had been to get the material to the people equipped to act on it, and then to trust that they would do what they were equipped to do. Trelawney sent her updates. She read everything, was available for every question the federal investigators had, and there were many questions over many months. She answered all of them with the precision she had built over weeks of living inside the archive and making its contents part of herself. But she did not go to Sacramento to watch. She stayed on the mountain, and she worked. The tower had good bones. That was what Osmond said the first time he came up and assessed it seriously. Walking the perimeter, checking the concrete for stress fractures, examining the base of the steel staircase with the eye of someone who had been maintaining structures in mountain conditions for 50 years. Good bones, he said. Copper needs work in 3 places. The stairs need a full sanding and re-anchoring. The rest is sound. They replaced the loose copper panels over 3 weekends. Osmond and his son-in-law, Aldrich, a quiet and competent man who knew what he was doing with a hammer and did not need to be asked to do things twice. Junia worked alongside them, learned from watching and then doing, the way competence is actually acquired and retained. She sanded the steel staircase herself, every step, every rail, down to bare metal. Then she primed it and painted it in 3 coats of a matte black rust-inhibiting paint that Osmond had recommended. 200 hours of work. She did it in the hours between time in the archive. The interior of the observation cabin she did in order. Floor first, then walls. Then the compass rose in the center of the floor. She cleaned the brass inlay with a soft cloth and mineral oil, turn by turn, until the letters came back. She worked through the fall and into the winter, with a consistency that was the closest thing to peace she had known in her life. Not the absence of difficulty, the presence of purpose. The specific satisfaction of work that is necessary. and is being done correctly. Below ground, the archive stayed intact and organized. Its contents now duplicated in 3 federal agencies and 2 university libraries that had agreed to maintain the research record permanently. But the archive itself remained, as Elmira had built it, a complete original record, the physical embodiment of years of patience and love and careful solitary work. Junia opened it, in the legal sense. She filed documentation with the County Historical Records Office, identifying the archive and its contents as a private collection of public interest materials properly described and properly preserved. Trelawney had taken a day to think about this, then said it was the right thing to do. It stops being a secret, and that is exactly what it needs to stop being. She named it the Ashen Beacon Memorial Archive, dedicated to the communities of Fenning Crossing, Idaho, Millhaven, Oregon, 2 towns in Washington, 3 in Northern California. The names of the towns went on a bronze plate at the entrance to the underground rooms. Idella Ravencroft came for the dedication. She stood at the edge of the granite shelf in a good wool coat and a scarf her daughter had knitted for her, and she looked up at the tower, at the copper crown, at the observation cabin 90 feet in the air. The other families came too, not all 47, 23 of them, from 4 states, some in wheelchairs, some walking with canes, some with adult children and grandchildren beside them. They stood on the granite shelf together in a cold October wind. Junia spoke briefly. She said only what needed to be said, that the archive was theirs, that the tower was theirs, that her grandmother had built it and preserved it against the day this could happen, and that this was the day. She read the names of the towns, then she stepped aside. Idella came forward, and in a voice that did not waver, she said the name of her husband, Alden Ravencroft, and the year he had died, and the words he had said to her in a hospital room 3 days before the end. Someone should have asked us. The wind moved through the pines around the tower. One after another, the families came forward. Each one said a name and a year. Some said more than that. Some said only the name and the year. There was no order and no protocol. There was only the fact of standing on the granite shelf together and saying the names out loud in front of a tower that had been built to hold them. It took an hour and a half. When it was finished, Marigold Halpern led the families down the granite shelf and into the archive rooms below. She stayed with them the whole time because Marigold had been a nurse for 42 years, and she knew how to be with people who were holding something heavy. That night, after everyone had gone, Junia climbed the 187 steps to the top of the tower alone. She had brought the leather logbook with her. She had brought a small oil lamp and a pencil. She lit the lamp on the wooden shelf. The compass rose glowed dim beneath her boots. The valley below was dark except for one line of small lights along the county highway. She opened the logbook. She turned to the last written page, Elmira's final entry, dated 3 weeks before she had died. The porch is holding. The roof has one loose shingle on the east slope that I cannot reach safely. The hatch seal is good. The archive is intact. Everything is in order. I have done everything I can do. The rest belongs to her. Junia held the pencil above the first blank page, wrote the date. Archive verified and complete. Evidence transmitted to federal authorities. Investigation ongoing. Copper roof repaired. Steel staircase re-anchored. Compass rose cleaned. Loose panel on the east slope has been replaced. She thought about the 23 families who had stood on the granite shelf that afternoon and said the names of their dead out loud in the cold wind. About Idella Ravencroft holding the top of her cane so hard that her knuckles had gone white. About the ones who had not come, and the ones who had come who could not speak. And about her mother who had made a career of asking questions so that people like this could be heard. She thought about her father tracing a chemical signature through water tables across state lines because he believed the work mattered. She thought about Elmira, who had built this tower alone, who had waited 19 years, who had sat outside a group home in Bakersfield once a year in a parked car on a Tuesday afternoon because it was the only way she had been able to be close. She wrote the last line. Almira, I found it. I used it. I am staying. She closed the log, set it on the wooden shelf beside the oil lamp. Then she stood up and walked to the curved window on the east side of the cabin. The sky was clear. The stars were coming out one by one over the valley. The mountains at the far horizon were a dark line against the deepening blue. The brass key was in her jacket pocket. It had been in her jacket pocket every day since she arrived, the way some people carry a particular stone from a particular place. Not as a symbol, but as a fact. Something real and weighted that connects the hand holding it to the hands that held it before. She turned it over once between her fingers. Then she put it back. She blew out the oil lamp. The dark folded around her like the closing of a door she had been walking toward her whole life. Below her, the valley held its line of small lights. Above her, the copper crown turned black against the deepening blue. And somewhere in a house down in the town, Marigold Halpern was setting out 2 coffee cups for the morning, because tomorrow Junia would come down for breakfast. And the morning after that, and the one after that. The mountain was hers now. The tower was hers. The archive was hers. The work was hers. And the waiting was over. For everyone. Junia stood at the top of her tower and watched the stars fill in one by one over the country her grandmother had chosen for her. 19 years ago, on a Tuesday morning in October, when Almira had made a decision that could not be undone, and had lived every day since with the weight of it, Junia was going to live every day with it too. She was ready. She had been made ready, and now the mountain was hers to keep.